Okay, ready to go. Welcome, everyone, obviously. Thank you all for being here. We are gathered here tonight to honor the memory of an all-American asshole. And ladies and gentlemen, I predict that you will be booing the memory of this man before the end of our time here tonight. For some of you, I probably won't have to try that hard. You know all about what this guy was like. But for many here, and for the majority of America, they all think that he was a pretty swell guy. But before we get into the guy whose name I borrowed for the title of this lecture, and before we get into the cultural phenomenon by which you likely think that you know him, I think it's important to first explore why the American public was so receptive to believing that there was this heroic, lesser-known founding father to begin with. Because those founding fathers have been getting under our skin lately, haven't they? The Supreme Court evoked them when they set back the clock on reproductive rights earlier this year. And not too long ago, we had people waving flags bearing all the symbols of the Revolution of 1776, attacking the Capitol building in their name. And everywhere, it seems that our rights as citizens, which have been earned in the years since the founding of our country, that they're being questioned by fringe groups clawing their way into the mainstream, and all to please these guys, right? I mean, that's what we're told. Have you guys ever heard of this wacky judicial theory called originalism? Raise your hands if you have. No? Okay. Now, a majority of our Supreme Court, they believe this, and they really believe that the opinions of dead people are more important than the rights of the living. It's just crazy. And it's total bullshit, of course. Like so many other ideas that are threatening our democracy, originalism is a relatively new idea. It came about as a response to the civil rights movement in the 50s and 60s. And while this is being taken seriously by American politicians, most of us agree that the people who created our government 240 odd years ago, they wouldn't be our first choice if we were to start our society today now, would they? And yet, I believe there is still this need in America, this desire within us to connect with the founding of our country, if for no other reason than learning from the past might be worthwhile if it helped explain even a fraction of what is going on in our time. Just watch me now. So just so you know, just so you and I are on the same page about what we think about the founders, I think it would be helpful to go through the list that most of us probably have in our heads when we say founding fathers. And in the spirit of those founders, I won't wait for a vote. So let's start naturally with George Washington. Now Washington is pretty easy to dismiss. Obviously he was a slave owner, but it's his lack of courage and failure of leadership which helped carry that evil practice into the newly formed country. Washington is praised with establishing a lot of standards, like the peaceful transfer of power, but he's ultimately to blame for all the things that he could have done but didn't. This is his successor, John Adams, the Buzz Aldrin of American presidents. Now, he was not a slave owner, but he was a rabid elitist, okay, who distrusted the people of the United States, and many of his major policies were geared toward limiting the power of the average American. Next up, Ben Franklin. Now, he's definitely one of the more kind of cuddly, lovable founders, right? We all have to admit. But he still owned slaves, and he failed to use his influence to make the Constitution a kinder document that reflected his progressive views. And that, of course, brings us to Thomas Jefferson, right? There's so much there, right? And I know for most of us, he's like an easy, hard pass, right? We all know his rap sheet. He was a slave owner, serial abuser, and a depressing final resting place for the ideals of the Enlightenment. So this is the core, right? This is the core at the founding of America, and it's distressing to a lot of people. Could it really be, this bunch who made all the rules by which we still live by? It's enough to make you think that a country founded by these guys is no country at all. And yet we talked about that desire, that to know where we came from, to believe our country is real, founded on something more than just an elaborate tax dodge or whatever assemblage of prejudices that these guys joked about at the urinals. So I totally understand why many people were ready to find a hero, to be inspired by something that had to do with the founding of the country. And just when maybe it seemed most needed, along came a musical that appeared to offer a solution in the form of this guy. His name is Alexander Hamilton. No, sorry. Now, I know what a lot of you are thinking, right? Hey, Greg, I have Disney+. I know everything there is to know about Alexander Hamilton, right? Well, unlike the rosy impression that most of America has about this guy, the historical flesh and blood Hamilton was actually the sum of all the worst traits of all those founders that we just went over, just all wrapped up into one diabolical package. Let me run through his rap sheet quickly. Yeah. Way back at the beginning, before we had established an elected government, Hamilton tried to persuade General George Washington that he should declare himself King of America, just like right off the bat. King George III meet King George I. But now Washington was unwilling to do anything that crazy, so he rejected this. But Hamilton still fought to place a kind of aristocratic structure in a more subtle, kind of less splashy, less kingy way. And he fought to implement the Electoral College that we all hate today. And direct election of our presidents is not like a 21st century idea. It's not like something we came up with. That idea was on the table. Hamilton's like, no, I don't trust these people. So Hamilton is basically the reason why W. Bush in 2000 and Donald Trump in 2016 won the presidency while losing the popular vote. He sucks, right? I could go on, and I will. So he thought senators should be appointed for life, which ironically is kind of how it is today, right? I mean, raise your hand if in November you're going to be voting for Chuck Schumer. He's essentially running unopposed after occupying the seat for 20 years, and he'll probably have it for 20 more. And he'll still go on to live, because those people live forever. But the kicker for me, the thing that most people seem to hook into about the story of Alexander Hamilton is that even though he was born somewhere else and came to America seeking a better life for himself, Hamilton was anti-immigrant. He was working hard to pass the Naturalization Act, which extended the amount of time that you had to be in the country in order to vote. He passed the Alien Act, which gave the government the right to deport anybody they wanted on any charge. And the Sedition Act, which said that you can't write, print, utter, or publish anything that criticized the government. Yeah, I know. I mean, these are all very kind of Trumpian acts, right? I mean, fake news, build a wall. Like, this is like Hamilton, invented it. And sorry to mention the T word, but speaking of Trump, speaking of him, in the recent Supreme Court ruling, which I mentioned earlier, which overturned Roe v. Wade, the majority ruling that originalist Anton Scalia wrote, or the majority opinion that he wrote, Alexander Hamilton is quoted like many times in it, if you read it, to strengthen the arguments and overturn 50 years of established law. Sorry, I don't mean to hold on that image for too long. It's better. And how did a guy with his fingerprints all over, so many modern controversies, in a time when nobody, and I mean nobody, is getting a pass for their historical wokeness, and when every history that's written in the 21st century seems geared toward undermining all of the social studies classroom lessons of the 20th century, for some reason, Alexander Hamilton has been given a hall pass. And it's funny, right? How did early America's favorite proto-neocon snake worm his way into the public consciousness as a good guy, as like a standard bearer for like lefty defiance and all the great things that came in our founding? How in the world did this guy, Alexander, don't make me say it once, Hamilton, pull it off? Lin Manuel Miranda. Such a Miranda, right? And I think we all know him, right? He's the creator of the musical cleverly titled Hamilton, which opened in 2015 to some success. If I can pull a typical quote from the time, since its opening last year, not only has Hamilton grossed $1 billion worth of tickets, won a Pulitzer Prize and 11 Tonys, and become the most successful Broadway opening of all time. But Miranda has been credited with everything from reinventing musical theater to revolutionizing the way Americans think about their history. It's a hell of a review. I mean, people were drawn to the story of the production, its diverse and inclusive cast, which seemed like a bold subversion of the story of the founding of America. Tickets became the thing to have, like the status symbol in New York fucking City. And the spectacle that resulted tricked Jane and John Q. Instagram into buying into the show and the projection of the main character, especially with reviews more like this. It was simply the best piece of art in any form that I have ever seen in my life. That's Michelle Obama, pictured here with the cast of Hamilton, the musical, behind her. Just wrap your brain around that quote. Simply the best piece of art in any form that I have ever seen in my life. This is a person who's been around. I mean, I can think of a few ones I'd rate higher, and everyone here probably could too. Here's another review from the Times at the time. The show has also attracted some more rarefied VIPs, political figures with firsthand knowledge of the pressures and scandals that come with running this country. Those two things, by the way, don't have to go hand in hand. But who could the Times have been talking about? It goes on to say, Bill, Hillary, and Chelsea Clinton attended earlier this month, arriving just before curtain to the surprise of audience members who had been craning their necks to get a glimpse of Jake Gyllenhaal. It goes on to say, and last weekend, Dick Cheney and his wife, the historian Lin Cheney, dropped in. Their review? I thought it was just great, Mrs. Cheney said in a telephone interview, adding that her husband loved it too. Later in the article, the Times notes, the Cheneys did not go backstage to Mr. Miranda's regret. I would have loved to talk to them, he said, and probably not in the way that you or I would like to have a few words with a Dick Cheney. Obama famously said that a shared love of Hamilton was the only thing that he and Dick Cheney could agree on. But I can think of like a lot of things that they also have in common. Low-hanging fruit. Okay, so have I seen Hamilton? Have I seen Hamilton the musical? I have not. Okay. Before I started prepping for this talk, I kind of promised myself that I would see it, look at it objectively, try and gain something from it. And it's a promise I'm glad I didn't keep. But I did read the book that it's based on, Ron Chernow's cleverly titled Alexander Hamilton. Now, while it's a pretty flattering portrait of Hamilton, I can't understand how someone can read that book and not understand exactly who Alexander Hamilton as a nation builder and as a man, really was. So I genuinely believe there's a better than decent chance that Lin never made it through the whole thing, okay? Or at the very least, he didn't read any other sources to broaden out his base of research. Because I think in the end, Lin was more focused on himself and weaving the story of Hamilton in with his own life. So one guy's improbable rise to power would presage his own. Some of you may be familiar with this clip that went around YouTube at the time. It's Lin Manuel performing an early song from the show while it was still being developed for DC luminaries at the White House's Evening of Poetry, Music, and the Spoken Word in 2009. He shared the stage with people like James Earl Jones and Michael Chabon. But how did this guy, right? How did this guy who had only a single Broadway credit to his name get the chance to perform at the White House? Despite what people believe, this wasn't a story of some kid from the Bronx making it all the way to the White House to perform for the president with talent and a dream. The reason Lin was here was because of this guy. It's his father. Now his father is Luis Miranda. Apart from being his father, he's also a real estate speculator. He's a corporate lobbyist, and he's a former longtime fixer for various rogue elements within the Democratic Party, including the Clinton family. Now, Luis Miranda has been kind of rocking back and forth between public service and private enterprise for the last 40 years. He started out advising Ed Koch, New York City mayor, in the 80s. And then he worked for Rudy Giuliani, traitor, when he was mayor of New York. And eventually, Luis managed to carve out his own special place in the New York political life. He founded a lobbying firm to provide companies with access to politicians he was helping out. He also started a nonprofit foundation, which funneled millions of dollars through it. Now, each year, his influence as a political strategist for hire grew, and as his orbit grew to include the likes of Hillary Clinton, as I keep saying, Chuck Schumer, Kristen Gillibrand, Andrew Cuomo, and most recently, Letitia James. And I think that last political figure is a great example of Luis's work. This cozy relationship between behind-the-scenes statecraft on one hand and like making some fucking money on the other. So Letitia James is, of course, New York State's Attorney General, pictured here with an unknown gentleman probably pointing out a female staffer's tight blouse. Recently, and not for the first time, Lin Miranda was able to profit from both sides of an issue, with Tish James on one side and a little company called Amazon on the other. Now, at the same time that Luis was advising James on whether or not she should run for governor last year, his lobbying firm was also accepting money to advocate for the best interests of Amazon. No big deal, right? I mean, lobbyists are going to lobby, and Amazon, as a client from the perspective of Luis's firm, is a heck of a get. Except that James, in her function as Attorney General, was supposed to be suing Amazon on behalf of New York State workers. Now, I pick on this guy, Luis, only because I think he's really central to the story of Lin. And Lin is an important link to the understanding of Alexander Hamilton, the subject of the history lecture that you're all here to learn about. But I'm not alone. The New Inquiry did a piece on father and son not too long ago, 2019, and it's a great read. According to the author, Lin Miranda is heavily involved in his son's career decisions, particularly as they relate to Lin Manuel's political forays. Lin Manuel has expanded his sphere of influence within political networks between New York and Puerto Rico, and Mr. Miranda, in turn, has an outrageously popular public relations song and dance man at his proposal. Lin Manuel becomes the face of political advocacy for Puerto Rico, guided by his father's business desires. It's a rough quote. But let's look at those, that political advocacy and those possibly improper business desires. Because while Hamilton the musical was at the peak of its popularity, a bill went up in the United States Congress to determine the financial future of the island of Puerto Rico, the place where Father Luis Miranda was born, and that son, Lin Manuel Miranda, thinks of as his cultural birthright. In 2015, the government of Puerto Rico was about to default on their debt. They had racked up something like $120 billion worth of debt, something they were probably never going to be able to pay back. And the interest on that loan had been accruing for years as part of a deliberate mismanagement and predatory lending strategy by American banks. Since the United States took over Puerto Rico from Spain in 1898, Americans on the mainland have been running the place like a massive sugar plantation, holding companies back in mid-Atlantic states, reaping huge profits off the backs of Puerto Rican labor, with only a small percentage of that money staying within the country. So this colonial operation, essentially, was looting resources, allowing or encouraging mismanagement. And when the bill finally came due after 100 plus years, instead of letting Puerto Rico act like a proper US state, which has crazy budget shortfalls all the time, New York State right now has something like $160 billion worth of debt. They're not alone. Instead of letting them just keep going like we do, or maybe coming up with some better plan, they introduced a bill called PROMESA. The Puerto Rican Oversight, Management, and Economic Stability Act, or PROMESA, was introduced. This bill was going to grant the federal government supreme authority over how Puerto Rico spent its money and repaid the debt. By imposing a board of unelected officials, known as La Junta, to the people of Puerto Rico, the board would make all decisions without public hearing and any transparency whatsoever. Yeah, this really happened. Now, Lin Manuel Miranda pictured here, I assume, soberly demonstrating his command of macroeconomic theory, fought very hard for PROMESA to pass. He petitioned the halls of government. He wrote op-eds in support of the plan, this one in the Times, and he even appeared on the John Oliver show, tricking that guy into urging Congress to vote for this thing to pass. And it worked. Congress passed PROMESA in 2016, and Obama signed it into law as soon as it came across his desk. After which, austerity measures were immediately introduced, cutting social programs, education budgets, just hollowing out the quality of life there. Probably most outrageously to me, the minimum wage there was cut from $7 an hour to $4.25. Okay? This is taking money out of the pockets of people who could least afford it in order to pay back predatory banks who shouldn't have been lending at the level they were in the first place. While in the 6-year lifespan, PROMESA, the board has paid out something like $1 billion in outside consultancy fees. And these aren't like Joe Lunchpail folks, these are corporate bankers. And privatization politics by Liunta, butchering that, have also meant that whole swaths of formerly public land in Puerto Rico have been sold to private companies on the cheap, while between 100 and 200 schools, which is a big number over there, have been forced to close, and the number of people living below the poverty line has grown. The archipelago continues to suffer from a mass exodus to the US. Its people too frustrated to stay in a system stacked completely against them. Their country literally sold out from beneath their feet. And to make things even worse, after Hurricane Irma and Hurricane Maria in 2017 and earthquakes in 2022, Puerto Rico is more vulnerable than ever. These disasters have accelerated the drop in land values, further opening up the island to grifters and corporate speculators of the worst kind. Permit me to read from this particular article at length. Won't wait for the vote again. We spoke to local farmers, residents, Puerto Rico's governor, and Monsanto officials to find out why the U.S. territory allows agrochemical companies to grow crops that are not native to the island on some of the most fertile land, while simultaneously importing more than 85% of its food. We also ask, how should Puerto Ricans build a more sustainable, equitable future for themselves? And most importantly, is Monsanto the reason why so many Puerto Ricans are getting sick? It's just tragedy after, like, nightmare after nightmare. But when the people of Puerto Rico needed him the most, right? Lin was there, yay! And his solution to the problems of, to all these problems, his plan was to, let me just double check my notes, partner with Nespresso. Oh, what a great, all right, I want to show you a video that was produced by the Nespresso company along with Lin Manuel Miranda, and really the only person you could conceivably call in a crisis such as this, right? Michael Clayton, a gutsy corporate attorney with a conscience who exposes the misdeeds of corrupt monopolies exploiting the innocent. I'm kidding. If you haven't seen the movie Michael Clayton, this is maybe the great joke, the best joke, or if you have, it's probably not the best. But this is a masterpiece of a movie. Watch it tonight. Both Tom Wilkinson, Tilda Swinton, sensational performances. And the film's message, the subject about exposing corruption and the possibility of redemption through selfless good work should be ingrained in the American psyche, right? Do you guys remember when George Clooney had Integrity? That was fun, right? I mean, that's probably the last good movie he's done. And he was in, after that, he did an episode of Entourage, and I think like everything after that, just like, it was cursed. Okay, we can kind of see this. So I'm going to try and play this if it doesn't shut off. It's not a very long video, but I think it's essential watching. So, all right. This is frame one. We actually got to see this. The title card, right? Nespresso is working with the Hispanic Federation to revive coffee in Puerto Rico. Something important to know, I think, is that the Hispanic Federation, that's Lin's father's foundation. and the sole beneficiary, in addition to Nespresso, with doing this work in Puerto Rico. Now, is that significant? That's not for me to say, or it is. But while we consider that question, let's touch on the other key moments that I can't erase from my brain. This is Lin's tattoo. It's his actual tattoo of a coffee cup on his ankle. This is the worst tattoo I've ever seen in my entire life. And I'm on Reddit, too, like, terrible. And also, what I can't seem to forget, Coffee Avengers, right? It's like, yeah, great, Lin. They have a very weird dynamic. Clooney cracks a joke about Lin being short, which means Lin either didn't have Final Cut on the video, or he was just too busy like licking like George's palm to care. But you know, the most important takeaway to me is Clooney just gushing about the quality of the soil in Puerto Rico. The land, the soil is rich. I read something into him repeating the word rich, but maybe you don't. But Puerto Rico has incredibly rich soil. It's true. There's also the rep from Nespresso saying, you know, it took a hurricane for us to realize how great coffee grows in Puerto Rico. It's like, no, you didn't. You were waiting for the land values to drop. So, and again, why does Puerto Rico import 85% of its food if this soil is so great? This is another report that questions this insane stat, 85% of their food. But the United States continues to treat Puerto Rico like a plantation, especially now that the main island is dominated by big growers like Monsanto and now Nespresso. Nespresso, by the way, is owned by Nestle, one of the world's worst brands in terms of water theft and general just environmental exploitation and neglect. So whenever you hear that name, Nespresso, you should immediately think Nestle. In fact, let's try that now. When I say Nespresso, you didn't say Nestle, okay? When I say Nespresso, you say Nestle. Nespresso. Nestle. Nespresso. Nestle. Yes. Oh, so good. And it was Lin Manuel Miranda who brought them to the shores of Puerto Rico. Now, he could have done anything, this guy, right? Remember, this is the guy who made like $1 billion off of Hamilton. He could have started Miranda's Own, right? Like a kind of Puerto Rican Newman's Own. I'm not kidding. Like, it's a good idea. Where like 90% of the profits or whatever go back to the people of Puerto Rico who produced it. With his Hamilton money, Manuel Miranda could have seeded many entire industries, cutting out Nespresso and establishing the monetary basis for Puerto Ricans to stand themselves up to get back on their own feet. But he didn't. He traded on his heritage and traded in on a boulderized version of American history, only to advance his own narrow aims, which were to enrich himself and his family, I think. But that's just from an economic side, right? From a political side, Lin could have started a fucking revolution in Puerto Rico. And it should have been on brand for him, right? The most powerful country in the world wants to run things from a distance and control how your money is spent. That's a modern day tale of no taxation without representation if I've ever heard it. But what did the Hamilton guy do instead? Does he take inspiration from the role he'd been playing on stage and rally the people of Puerto Rico, using his obvious talent for persuasion to stoke nonviolent civil disobedience while shaping public opinion back in the new US to push for statehood in Puerto Rico, or maybe even independence if they wanted? Not a crazy idea. The population of Puerto Rico would make it our 31st or 32nd largest state. Not crazy. And it's a good story. And Lin could have actually made history instead of just making it up. Terrible. But sadly, Lin picked another path where he did what his dad told him to do, and he got to hang out with George Clooney. So here we are, right? Just swept up in this 21st century cultural vortex where history meets the arts, meets capitalism, meets philanthropy, meets politics and governance and lobbying and celebrity and scholarship and real estate and agriculture and manipulation of the press and the public. Just all these things coming together in a toxic cocktail that costs too much and subverts the will of the people, fundamentally undermining basic human rights and adding to the decay of what I would consider to be a society of decency. Just all for the greater greed. This post-modern enema of misdirected bullshit, marinating for generations in a gnarly mutation of modern-day feudalistic excess. All because of him. Nobody? Okay. Allow me. Boo! Boo! Hiss! Boo! All right, we're back in a history lecture, people. Because I think it's particularly ironic that every single measure, every single one included in PROMESA, limiting the vote, vesting absolute decision-making power in an unelected governing body, which puts profits and the promise of economic progress over people's quality of life, all of this would have been exactly the kind of thing that Alexander Hamilton would have heartily endorsed. And when Lin fought for this, he didn't do it as the creator of In the Heights, right? He did it as a Hamilton guy, essentially in his name. And to everyone who trusted him at this point, they thought that Alexander Hamilton was the ultimate symbol of American liberty, and like Lin was carrying his message into the world. Now, Lin has since gone back on his support of PROMESA, and he says he regrets fighting for the policy. This tweet is from May of 2017, but it's a little late, even then. And also, is it just me, or does that not read like an apology? I don't see sorry in there. But this is what can happen, right? Make no mistake about it. History is powerful shit. There's that saying that a little knowledge can be a dangerous thing. The wrong tools, the wrong interpretation, in the wrong hands can make the world a worse place. Now, we should be past our national Hamilton mania, because within the last couple of years, new research has uncovered proof that Alexander Hamilton owned slaves. Let me say that again. Alexander Hamilton, he wasn't our first abolitionist or whatever the musical says. He owned slaves, and he traded in them, but we kind of already knew that, but he fucking owned them. Now, if everybody realized what a right-wing nut job he was on top of all of that, I think we could put the final nail in the coffin of Alexander Hamilton's second coming. Also, this is fun. Yeah. This is a picture of Hamilton giving an underhanded Nazi salute. No, I'm kidding, sorry. But if we're really looking for an alternative to Washington, to Adams, to Franklin, to Jefferson, a kind of solution to the Hamilton problem, if you will, I would like to introduce you to this guy. His name is Thomas Paine. He was an important founding father, and once upon a time, he was considered to be America's original sweetheart. Some of you may know his name, but most of you likely don't. So I'm going to run through his CV like we did with the rest of the people. We'll see how he stacks up. And how, in many ways, Hamilton is actually occupying a Thomas Paine-shaped hole in our public consciousness. Paine, like Hamilton, he was an immigrant, but unlike Hamilton, whose daddy had money and shared it with his son, Paine came to America with the equivalent of probably like $30 in his pocket, like how I came to New York. No, he showed up right when the revolution was getting started, and he famously wrote a pamphlet called Common Sense. Common Sense. It made the case more compellingly than anyone else for breaking away from England and fighting the war that gained us our independence. And the thing sold more copies than the Catcher in the Rye. Paine donated all the profits from Common Sense to the American army that was fighting at the time, and he helped the Continental Congress function during those war years, and he wrote additional pamphlets to keep everyone's morale up. All these things read really, really cute to me, okay? And admirable and decent. Something people don't know about Paine is that he had a substantial role in writing the Declaration of Independence. It was not just Thomas Jefferson, but that guy took all the credit. Who wouldn't? After the war ended, we won. Paine went back to England to see if there was any revolutionary spirit there, any kind of contact high that England got from the colonies. He wrote the book on pissing your boss off called The Rights of Man, and it angered King George III, so much so that he ordered Paine's arrest, which would have likely meant his execution. Paine fled. He ended up in France. I'll go through this really quickly. Right on the eve of their revolution, which he had a great hand in shaping, he helped craft the French Declaration of Rights of Man and their national constitution before that whole thing violently imploded, like, that's a bad joke, like a crowd walking out of a soccer game between France and, I don't know, Italy, Germany, whatever. But when he returned to America, only 20 years after these journeys abroad, just kind of trying to stir up the pot of revolution, when he returned to America after 20 years, Paine was shocked to find that the cool thing that he and his friends had only just created was already being run by capital cronies and the worst kind of company men. I think you know who's coming. Chief among them was this guy, Alexander Hamilton. Yeah! Boo! Finally, I'm so glad. Now, Paine hated Hamilton. He hated Adams. All those Trumpian laws that we mentioned at the start of the lecture, limiting immigration, free speech, these were in effect at this time. Paine is like, this isn't the America I remember, but he really remembered when there's no America. Paine grew to hate Washington, the guy he considered responsible for letting Hamilton and Adams sell out the revolution. And Paine lived his whole life fighting against the idea that just a few people in the room get to decide the fate of an entire country. Thomas Paine was a dangerous man from the perspective of anyone with undue wealth or unearned privilege. These jokers are an example of people who weren't a fan of his. Guy on the left, George III, tried to kill him. King Louis hated him, but when they were chopping people's heads off in France, Paine fought for his life. He goes, kill the king, but spare the man. They ended up doing both, or they ended up killing both. And Napoleon kicked him out of France. So that's a pretty, if you were to judge somebody based on their enemies, it's a pretty good list. Now, Paine's ideas are still dangerous to this day. So to me, it makes total sense that many of you don't know who he was, because his story continues to be suppressed by an establishment threatened by his beliefs. And that goes for people who looked like those three guys on that last slide, and those who secretly or not so secretly wish they did, like Hamilton. I'm going to go through this really quickly. I wrote a book about Paine. It's called Fort Knox, New Jersey. And in it, I attempted to contextualize Paine within the wider independence movement and answer the critics who say there were no good founders, or that America has always been this cynical, cash-grabbing enterprise. Because if you go back and you look at Paine's greatest hits, his entire life was about doing the right thing, about looking out for people who needed help, and standing up for just causes, even if they appeared hopeless, without concern for self-interest. And Paine wasn't alone. The American Revolution was not just these founding fathers. There were hundreds of thousands of people who fought against the British with good intentions to achieve something that they truly believed in. Powerful forces carried Hamilton into the mainstream in order to profit off the ignorance and hoard wealth for themselves. And it hurt real communities. It hurt real people. Maybe if Lin had invested more in his research, he would have found out about Paine, learned from his example, changed founders midstream, so to speak, and tried to get the spirit of Paine to grow in the imaginations of his audience. But, you know, Paine's my guy, right? In the end, he's just a suggestion. If you're looking for a replacement to Hamilton, all aboard the Paine train. But ultimately, it doesn't matter if we appreciate any of these founders, Washington, Hamilton, Paine. What matters is that we appreciate the document that our society is founded on. And that's the motherfucking Constitution, okay? Something that, while it was originally created to limit how much power the people could wield, it was also constructed to change with the times, to grow with the will of those people, okay? This country is great because we don't have some queen whose 70-year-old child gets to take over if she dies, right? We're ruled by a document that we can have a hand in shaping. So essentially, we're governed by each other. And in this age, like the ones that have come before it, peopled by citizens with ever-rising expectations, we aren't greedy, or shouldn't feel greedy for wanting to expand our rights. It just shows that we have more ambition and more imagination than the people who came before us. Just like the people who came before us had more ambition and more imagination than the people who came before them. Back to the founders. I mean, that's really how it should work, right? We put way too much stock in what they would think of us today. Would Washington have approved of self-driving cars? What would Madison have said about the NFL switching to an 18-game season? These things don't matter. Why should we care? We are not, and never have been, beholden to a group of people who started our country. We're beholden to the Constitution, which is in turn beholden to us. There isn't some additional layer where we have to read our laws while imagining what Hamilton would have thought if he was reading along with us, like over our shoulder, like some ghost. I mean, that is some scary codependent behavior on the part of originalists, okay? And those people should recognize that, and they should go to therapy to try and explore that. Continuing the tradition of the Founding Fathers is to take whatever you liked about the old system and then update it to suit the times in which you're living, and always to expand participation in government and enshrine new rights for people to live as they would like. In the end, we have to look out for each other, though, because when we don't, bad actors are left to take the stage. And I mean bad actors, Lin, no, I'm kidding. And real people like those in Puerto Rico, they suffer. So the next time they try and do something like that, and they will, okay? Again, New York State has like 180 billion in debt. That's a lot of cannoli. So they're going to come for that. If they ever try to pull that shit again, let's not listen to some song and dance man dressed up like Paul Revere. Let's look to each other, link arms, and know that we have history on our side. Thank you very much. All right. Thank you. Okay. This is a bibliography. I'm a nerd. If you want to take a picture of that, this is a lot of the information I got for this talk. But thanks everyone for coming, and that's it.